You've probably done this today, maybe a few minutes ago, maybe while this video was loading, maybe without even noticing. You pick up your phone, look at the screen, no new messages, no notifications, nothing has changed. Then you put it down. 30 seconds later, you do exactly the same thing. You check again, and then again, and once more. Maybe it's your email, maybe it's WhatsApp, maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's a specific conversation, maybe it's someone who still hasn't replied, maybe it's news you're waiting for, maybe it's simply the feeling that there's something you need to check, and there's something extremely interesting about that. Because most of the time, you already know there's probably nothing new, and yet you check anyway, and that raises a fascinating question. Why? Why do intelligent, self-aware people who are perfectly capable of logical reasoning keep checking the same information over and over again? Why can't rational thought stop this behavior? Why, even when you know you just looked at your phone, is there still a part of your mind that keeps saying, check again? Maybe you've noticed something curious. A lot of the time, we're not looking for information, we're looking for a feeling. And that difference completely changes the way we understand this behavior. Because most people believe they check their phone to find answers. But often, the brain is doing something else. It's trying to find safety. Now notice something deeply revealing. Over the last few videos, we've explored an important pattern. We've talked about hypervigilance. We've talked about uncertainty. We've talked about the brain trying to predict what will happen next. And checking behavior is directly connected to all of it. Because checking is a form of monitoring. And monitoring is a form of vigilance. Now think about this for a moment. Imagine you've sent an important message. Maybe professional, maybe personal, maybe emotionally significant. You send it. The conversation ends, but your brain doesn't. Something keeps running in the background. A kind of invisible process, as if one part of your mind remains focused on the situation, waiting for an update, waiting for a change, waiting for a response, and then you check. For a few seconds, a specific feeling appears, a brief feeling, almost imperceptible, but very real. The feeling that now you know, even if the reply still hasn't arrived. Now you know it still hasn't arrived, and that creates a momentary sense of relief. There is an extremely important concept in neuroscience called uncertainty reduction. The brain is constantly trying to decrease information gaps. It wants to know. It wants to update its models. It wants to reduce doubt. It wants to reduce ambiguity. And every time you check something, the system receives a small packet of information, even when that information is, nothing has changed. Do you see the paradox? The brain would rather receive information that nothing happened than continue not knowing whether something happened. Because not knowing keeps uncertainty active, and uncertainty requires vigilance. Now notice something fascinating. When we think about vigilance, we usually imagine someone watching for a threat, a guard, a sentinel, someone monitoring the environment. But the modern brain does something very similar. The difference is that the environment being monitored often isn't a forest, it isn't a dark street, it isn't a predator, it's a screen, an inbox, a conversation, a notification, an app, a small light blinking in the corner of a phone. The mechanism is the same. The object has changed. The system has not. There is an extremely interesting concept called relevance monitoring. The brain is constantly trying to identify any piece of information that may require future action. Something important, something unexpected, something potentially threatening, something potentially rewarding, and that creates an interesting situation. Because a message can represent many things at once: an opportunity, a rejection, an approval, a criticism, an emergency, good news, bad news, a change in direction. As long as you don't know which one it is, the brain keeps monitoring. Now think about something extremely common. You're working. Your phone is sitting next to you. You haven't received a notification. No sound, no vibration, and yet you still feel the urge to check. Maybe you've experienced this before. A kind of automatic impulse, as if something is pulling at your attention. And when you pick up the device, you discover there was nothing there. Even so, a few minutes later, the urge returns. Why? Because the behavior is not being fueled by information. It's being fueled by the possibility of information, and that is a huge difference. There is an extremely important concept in behavioral neuroscience called variable reward. Unlike a predictable reward, a variable reward appears unpredictably. Sometimes there's something new, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the message arrived, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the news appeared, sometimes it didn't. And that unpredictability creates a powerful effect because the brain pays much more attention to unpredictable rewards than to guaranteed rewards. Now imagine a slot machine. You pull the lever, you don't know the outcome. You try again, and again, and again. What keeps the behavior going is not winning every time. It's not knowing when you'll win. Now notice something uncomfortable. A large part of the modern digital environment works exactly the same way. You refresh your inbox. Maybe there's something there. Maybe not. You open an app. Maybe there's a notification. Maybe not. You check a conversation. Maybe there's a reply. Maybe not. Every check contains a small dose of uncertainty, and the brain loves trying to resolve uncertainty. But something even deeper is happening, because for many people, checking has stopped being just a habit. It has become a strategy for emotional regulation. Now think about this. Maybe you're waiting for an important response. As long as you don't check, there is tension, there is doubt, there is anticipation. Then you look, and for a few seconds, the tension decreases. Even though nothing has changed, the behavior created relief. And when a behavior creates relief, the brain learns. It learns quickly. There is a concept called negative reinforcement. Despite the name, it doesn't mean something bad. It simply means that a behavior temporarily removes an unpleasant feeling. You feel uncertainty. You check. The uncertainty decreases. The brain records. That worked. And then strengthens the likelihood of repeating the behavior in the future. Little by little. Day after day, week after week. Until something interesting happens. You're no longer checking because there is a concrete reason. You're checking because the system has learned that checking reduces discomfort. And perhaps that's exactly why so many people feel trapped in this cycle. Because they aren't chasing information, they're chasing relief. But there's a problem. The relief doesn't last long. Not long at all. Soon the doubt returns, the anticipation returns, the vigilance returns, and then the need to check appears again, and again, and again. But over the next few minutes, we're going to explore something even more surprising. Why some brains develop these monitoring cycles much more intensely than others. Why some people can ignore a message for hours, while others feel an almost physical need to check constantly. And why this behavior has much more to do with the nervous system than with a lack of discipline. Because what we're about to discover may completely change the way you understand your relationship with notifications, messages, and the seemingly uncontrollable need to look one more time. There is something even deeper happening when you check a message for the 10th time. Because in many cases, the behavior is no longer being driven by curiosity. It is being driven by the vigilance system. And to understand this, we need to look at one of the most important functions of the human brain, the function of detecting change. Now think about this for a moment. Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room. Nothing happens. No sound. No movement. Nothing new. After a few minutes, your attention naturally decreases. The brain conserves energy. But imagine that suddenly, something changes. A door opens. A phone rings. A light turns on. Instantly, your attention is captured. Because the brain was not built to monitor stability. It was built to monitor change. Throughout evolution, changes often carried important information. Something approaching, something moving away, something that required action, something that might represent opportunity or threat. And this characteristic is still operating today. The environment has simply changed. Now changes arrive in the form of notifications, messages, emails, alerts, updates. Small digital signals that capture the exact same neurological mechanisms once used to monitor the physical environment. There is an extremely important concept in neuroscience called prediction error. Perhaps it is one of the most fascinating ideas for understanding why some people cannot stop checking. The brain is constantly generating predictions. It predicts what will happen. It predicts what should happen. It predicts when something usually happens. And then it compares those predictions with reality. When prediction and reality match, the system remains stable. But when they do not, something happens. Attention increases. Now imagine an extremely common situation. You send a message to someone. That person usually replies within 5 minutes. Today, 40 minutes have passed. What happened? A discrepancy emerged. Reality did not match the expected pattern. And every time this happens, the brain generates an internal signal, a kind of cognitive alert, something equivalent to, there is an update pending. Notice how important this is. Often, it is not the message itself that activates anxiety. It is the broken expectation. The brain was expecting a pattern. The pattern did not occur, and now it needs to find out why. This is exactly where many compulsive checking behaviors begin. Because every time you look at your phone, the brain attempts to resolve that prediction error. It tries to update its model of reality. It tries to discover what changed. But there is a problem. Very often, there is not enough information to update anything. So the system keeps searching. Now notice something fascinating. Many people believe they check because something important is happening, but often they check because the brain detected a mismatch between expectation and reality. And mismatches demand explanation, at least from the perspective of the nervous system. Now, imagine a simple scenario. You post something on social media, maybe a photo, maybe a video, maybe a comment. During the first few minutes, likes begin to appear, comments, notifications. Then the flow slows down, but you keep checking. Why? Because the brain continues expecting updates. It continues expecting changes. It continues expecting new signals, and every check becomes an attempt to discover whether something new is happening. There is another extremely important concept called the seeking system, described by neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp. This system is not only related to pleasure, it is related to searching, exploration, anticipation, expectation, the pursuit of information, and that completely changes how we understand modern digital behavior. Because often we are not using our phones to consume information. We are using our phones to search for information. And searching activates very specific brain circuits. Circuits that generate energy, motivation, expectation, curiosity, but also restlessness. Now think about something curious. You open one app, close it, open another, close it, go back to the first one, open your email, close your email, look at a message, return to the home screen, open it again. All of this can happen in less than a minute, and often without any conscious goal. It feels almost automatic, because at a certain point, the behavior stops being a decision and becomes a loop. There is a concept called checking behavior. It has been widely studied in research on anxiety, hypervigilance, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, but it also appears in completely functional people with no diagnosis, no disorder, because the mechanism is human. Whenever uncertainty exists, the brain tends to monitor. Whenever monitoring exists, the possibility of checking appears. And when checking produces relief, the behavior becomes stronger. Now notice something extremely revealing. Every time you check and find a response, the brain learns. But every time you check and find nothing, the brain learns as well. And that sounds strange at first, but there is a reason. Because the simple act of checking temporarily reduces doubt. Even when no answer exists, you look. You confirm that nothing happened. For a few seconds, uncertainty decreases, and the system records that as a reward. The result? The behavior continues to be reinforced. Now imagine the impact of this over months or years. The brain begins to associate discomfort with the need for monitoring. Any feeling of doubt, any feeling of waiting, any feeling of uncertainty automatically triggers the urge to check. Check messages, check emails, check notifications, check the news, check updates, check anything that seems likely to contain an answer. But there is something even deeper. Because for many brains, the problem is no longer the information, it is the feeling of not knowing. And that connects directly to the previous video. Uncertainty creates vigilance. Vigilance creates monitoring. Monitoring creates checking. And checking creates temporary relief. That is the cycle. But notice the paradox. The behavior that appears to reduce anxiety is often feeding anxiety, because it teaches the brain a specific lesson, the lesson that not knowing is dangerous. Now imagine someone waiting for an important response. Every time they check their phone, they send an implicit message to the nervous system. This uncertainty needs to be resolved immediately, and the brain learns. It learns that waiting is a threat. It learns that doubt requires action. It learns that discomfort cannot remain unresolved. Little by little, without realizing it, the person becomes less and less tolerant of uncertainty and more dependent on checking. There is an extremely interesting concept called information delay intolerance. Some nervous systems have tremendous difficulty remaining with an unanswered question, not because they are weak, not because they are impatient, but because they learned that rapid information equals safety. And that is exactly why the modern digital environment exerts so much power over human attention, because it constantly offers the promise of immediate resolution, an update, a response, a confirmation, an explanation, a piece of news, something that reduces uncertainty, even if only for a few seconds. But this leads us to an even more important question. If the brain is using checking behavior to search for safety, why do some people seem trapped in this behavior far more intensely than others? Why can certain individuals leave their phone alone for hours, while others feel an almost physical need to check again? And there is an extremely interesting answer, because not all nervous systems interpret uncertainty in the same way. Some learn to live with it, others learn to monitor it constantly, and that difference may explain almost everything. In the next section, we are going to explore the deep connection between chronic hypervigilance, the need for control, threat sensitivity, and the seemingly irresistible urge to check one more time. Because perhaps the behavior is not revealing a problem with discipline. Perhaps it is revealing something much more important, the way the nervous system learned to search for safety. Now we arrive at an extremely important part of the story, because there is a question many people have never asked, a question that completely changes how we understand the urge to check. The question is, why can some people ignore a notification for hours, while others feel an almost physical need to look immediately? Why can some people leave their phone on the table and continue working, while others feel their attention being pulled back to the screen again and again? The answer is not in the technology. It is in the state of the nervous system. Because checking behavior rarely begins with the phone. It begins much earlier. It begins in the way the brain learned to deal with uncertainty, with unpredictability, with ambiguous signals, with the feeling that something important might be happening. Now think about something curious. Two people can receive exactly the same notification, the same sound, the same alert, the same message, but their internal reactions will be completely different. For one person, it is simply information. For the other, it feels like a call that cannot be ignored, as if something needs to be resolved immediately. And there is a fascinating reason for that. There is a concept called hypervigilance. Throughout the last few videos, we have talked extensively about this mechanism, but here, it takes on a different form. Because many people imagine hypervigilance as someone watching for physical dangers, someone monitoring external threats, someone constantly alert to concrete risks. But in the modern world, hypervigilance rarely appears that way. It often appears through information, messages, notifications, updates, emails, seemingly small changes. The brain is still doing the exact same ancient job, monitoring the environment. Only now the environment is digital. Now imagine a nervous system that spent years learning that something important could happen at any moment. Perhaps because of past experiences, perhaps because of unpredictable environments, perhaps because of long periods of stress, perhaps because of constant responsibilities, perhaps because of situations where paying attention genuinely made a difference. The brain learns a lesson, the lesson that fully relaxing is not safe. And once that learning takes hold, monitoring becomes automatic, not conscious, not deliberate, automatic. The system remains partially alert all the time, looking for signals, looking for changes, looking for information, looking for anything that might require a response. Now notice something extremely interesting. Many people believe they check because they want to find something, but often they check because they cannot stop searching. There is a huge difference between those two things. When you consciously search for a specific piece of information, the behavior has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when the vigilance system takes over, the process never ends, because there is always the possibility that something new exists. There is always the possibility that a message has arrived. There is always the possibility of an update. There is always the possibility of a change, and open possibilities keep attention trapped. Now imagine someone waiting for an important response, perhaps an interview, perhaps a medical result, perhaps a difficult conversation, perhaps a professional decision. The phone becomes more than a device. It becomes a potential source of relief, and that completely changes the relationship with it, because every check begins to carry an implicit promise. Maybe now there is an answer. Maybe now there is clarity. Maybe now the waiting will end. But most checks do not produce that answer. And then something curious happens. The brain keeps trying. There is an extremely important concept in behavioral neuroscience called variable reinforcement. Perhaps it is one of the most powerful mechanisms ever studied. The principle is simple. When a reward appears unpredictably, the behavior tends to become much more persistent. Think about a slot machine. You do not know when you will win, but precisely because you do not know, you keep playing. Now notice how this appears in the digital environment. Most of the time you check your phone. Nothing truly important has happened, but occasionally something has. A message you were waiting for, interesting news, an opportunity, a compliment, a confirmation, a positive surprise. And that is enough to strengthen the behavior. Because the brain learns something very specific. It learns that the next check might be the right one. The next refresh might contain something important. The next glance might finally provide the answer it has been searching for. And so the cycle continues. Now, think about something extremely common. You pick up your phone, open a social media app, close it, put the phone away. 30 seconds later, you pick it up again. But this time, there is not even a clear reason. You simply felt the urge. Maybe you have experienced this, maybe even today, maybe several times a day. And that reveals something fascinating. Because in many cases, the behavior no longer depends on a conscious decision. It has become automated. There is a concept called an attentional habit. Just as there are physical habits, there are habits of attention. The brain learns where to direct resources automatically, and the more frequently an action is repeated, the less conscious effort it requires. Now imagine the impact of thousands of checks repeated over the years. The system learns a pathway, a shortcut, an automatic response to discomfort. Feel doubt? Check. Feel waiting? Check. Feel anxiety? Check. Feel curiosity? Check. Feel boredom? Check. Little by little, different emotional states begin producing the exact same response. Pick up the phone. Now notice something even more revealing. Very often, the person believes they are checking because of an external problem, but the real trigger is internal. It is not the message. It is the feeling. It is not the notification. It is the tension. It is not the update. It is the discomfort. The phone simply offers a fast route to try to relieve it. And this helps explain something millions of people report: the feeling of being constantly busy, without knowing exactly with what, because a large portion of mental energy is being consumed by monitoring. Micro-checks, micro-verifications, micro-interruptions, tiny cycles of vigilance scattered throughout the day. Each one seems insignificant, but together they create something enormous, a brain that never fully switches off, a brain that remains partially waiting, partially monitoring, partially checking, partially searching. Now, there is an extremely important discovery, and it completely changes how we understand this behavior. Many people believe the problem is too much technology, but recent research suggests something deeper. Technology often amplifies mechanisms that were already present. It does not create the need for monitoring from nothing. It provides a perfect tool through which that need can express itself. And that means the root of the behavior is not only in the screen. It is in the relationship the nervous system has with uncertainty, with control, with safety, with vigilance. And that discovery brings us to the most important point of all. Because if the urge to check is not simply a lack of discipline, then the solution cannot simply be willpower. Something deeper is happening. Something related to the way the brain learns safety. Something related to the way the nervous system learns to tolerate unanswered questions. Something related to the ability to remain stable even when no update is available. And that is exactly what we are going to explore in the final section. Because there is a huge difference between eliminating the urge to check and understanding why it appeared in the first place. And when we understand that difference, something begins to change. Not through rigid control, not through guilt, but through a new relationship with the need to monitor itself. Now we arrive at the most important discovery of all. Because throughout this video, we've explored something that millions of people do every single day without realizing it. Check, refresh, update, look again, take one more glance, not necessarily because there's something new, but because the brain has learned that monitoring feels safer than not monitoring. We've talked about prediction error, we've talked about digital hypervigilance, we've talked about variable reinforcement, we've talked about monitoring loops. We've talked about the way the nervous system turns uncertainty into constant vigilance. And perhaps you've started to notice something important. Maybe the problem was never the phone. Maybe the problem was never social media. Maybe the problem was never the notification. Maybe those things are simply where something deeper is showing up. Because the urge to check doesn't begin on the screen. It begins with the need to reduce uncertainty. Now think about something extremely revealing. What are you hoping to find when you check? A message? An update? A response? Sometimes, yes. But very often, there is something even deeper being sought: relief. Behind countless checking behaviors is a quiet search for relief. A quick attempt to reduce internal tension. An attempt to close an open question. An attempt to regain a sense of predictability. And that completely changes the way we understand the behavior. Because when we look only at the action, it seems like a strange habit. But when we look at the function of the action, it begins to make sense. The brain is trying to solve something. The problem is that the solution it found is temporary. There is an extremely important concept in behavioral psychology called negative relief. The name sounds unusual, but the mechanism is simple. When a behavior temporarily reduces discomfort, that behavior tends to become stronger. Now imagine someone waiting for an important response. Anxiety rises. The person checks their phone. For a few seconds, there is relief, even if no message has arrived. The simple act of checking momentarily reduces the tension, and the brain records that. As a consequence, the next time anxiety appears, the urge to check returns. Not because it worked, but because it seemed to work. Now notice something fascinating. The relief didn't come from the information. It came from the action. That difference is enormous, because it means that many checking behaviors are not being performed to obtain answers. They are being performed to reduce discomfort. And that helps explain something many people have never understood about themselves. Why they keep checking even when they rationally know that nothing has changed. Why they keep refreshing a screen only seconds after the last refresh. Why they keep looking at notifications even when they are not expecting anything specific. The behavior is not being driven by logic, it is being driven by relief. Now, there is an extremely interesting finding from neuroscience. The brain learns far more quickly through the reduction of discomfort than through rational explanations. In other words, knowing that you don't need to check does not necessarily reduce the urge to check. Because the urge wasn't created by reason. It was created through emotional learning. It was created through repetition. It was created through the association between monitoring and a sense of safety. And that leads us to an important question. If the urge doesn't disappear simply because we understand the mechanism, then what actually creates change? The answer is surprisingly simple, but not necessarily easy. The brain needs to learn a new experience. Because experience is how it built this pattern. And experience is how it can begin to loosen it. Now think about something interesting. Every time the urge to check appears, the nervous system is making a prediction. The prediction is, if I don't check, I might miss something important. Or, if I don't monitor, I'll lose control. Or even, I need to look in order to feel safe. But there is a way for the brain to update that prediction through direct evidence, through real experience, through repeatedly discovering that nothing catastrophic happens when checking is delayed. Notice the word, delayed, not eliminated. That detail is extremely important, because many people end up in conflict with their own brain. They try to completely forbid the behavior. They try to fight the urge. They try to force self-control, and often end up creating even more tension. But there is another approach, an approach based on learning. When the urge appears, you do not necessarily have to obey it immediately. You also do not have to go to war with yourself. You can simply observe, notice, recognize, create a small pause, maybe a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, maybe a little longer. And during that pause, something fascinating happens. You begin to notice that the urge has a cycle. It rises, it reaches a peak, and then it decreases, like a wave. Now, there is an extremely important concept called uncertainty tolerance. Throughout the previous video, we explored this topic in depth, but here it appears again in a practical form, because every time you remain for a few moments without checking, the brain receives new information. The information that it is possible for a question to exist without an immediate answer, and still continue functioning. It is possible for a notification to remain unread, and still continue functioning. It is possible for an update to remain unknown, and still continue functioning. This learning seems small, but neurologically it is enormous, because it weakens the association between uncertainty and danger, little by little, without force, without perfection, without requiring that you never feel the urge to check again. Now notice something even deeper. Perhaps true freedom is not eliminating the urge. Perhaps it is no longer needing to automatically obey it. That difference changes everything, because the goal is not to turn the brain into a perfectly disciplined machine. The goal is to develop flexibility, the ability to choose, the ability to notice the urge without being pulled along by it. There is an extremely important concept called metacognition, the ability to notice what the mind is doing while it is doing it. Not afterward, not hours later, but during the process itself. It is the moment when you realize, my brain is looking for safety. My brain is trying to reduce uncertainty. My brain is entering monitoring mode. That awareness creates space, and space changes behavior, because what we consciously observe no longer operates entirely on autopilot. Now imagine something different. Imagine receiving a notification, feeling the urge, recognizing the urge, but realizing that it is not an order. It is only a signal produced by a nervous system trying to protect you in the best way it has learned. That shift in perspective reduces something extremely important, guilt. Because many people believe there is something wrong with them, They believe they do not have enough discipline. They believe they lack willpower. They believe they are failing at something that should be simple. But what is often happening is much deeper. The brain is running an old program, a program based on vigilance, a program based on monitoring, a program based on the constant attempt to reduce uncertainty. And understanding that does not immediately eliminate the behavior, but it does eliminate something very important: the idea that you are fighting against yourself. Now look at the bigger picture. When there is hypervigilance, monitoring emerges. When there is monitoring, checking emerges. When there is checking, temporary relief emerges. When there is temporary relief, the cycle becomes stronger. And then everything begins again. But the same brain capable of learning that cycle can also learn another one. A cycle based on tolerance, on flexibility, on gradual trust, on remaining present without constantly monitoring the environment, little by little, experience after experience, until something begins to change. You check less, and anxiety continues to decrease. You wait longer, and nothing terrible happens. You monitor less, and discover that you are still safe. Perhaps that is exactly why so many people feel exhausted today, not because they are always working, but because they are always monitoring. Monitoring messages, monitoring responses, monitoring notifications, monitoring updates, monitoring possibilities, monitoring a future that has not yet arrived. And monitoring requires energy, a lot of energy, a silent energy, an invisible energy, but a deeply exhausting one. Perhaps the first step is not abandoning the phone. Perhaps it is noticing what you are looking for in it, because very often it is not information, it is safety. And perhaps the most important discovery of this video is exactly that. The urge to check does not necessarily mean that something important is happening. Very often it simply means that the brain is trying to feel safe. Now tell me in the comments, in which situation do you notice this urge to check the most? When you're waiting for a message? When you post something on social media? When you're waiting for an important response? Or when you simply feel that something might have happened? Write a word, a situation, or an insight that came up while watching. Because very often, what we are able to recognize stops operating entirely on autopilot. And in the next video, we'll explore a discovery that connects directly to everything we've discussed here. Because there is a condition in which the brain remains on alert for so long that exhaustion no longer feels like fatigue. It begins to feel like survival. The next video is not burned out, still in danger. Because for many nervous systems, the problem is not a lack of rest. It's that the brain still believes the threat is present. And understanding that difference can completely change the way you interpret your own exhaustion.